Hello and welcome back to Born to Rant. I'm Brandon, and this week we are here to talk about the movie that set the template for what a kid's adventure movie could be. One of the best movies in Dick Donner's filmography, and of course the movie that taught all of us the most important lesson of all: Goonies never say die. That's right, today we are here to talk about how 1985's The Goonies came to be, everything that makes it awesome, and its legacy 40 years later. So I'm going to say something that might be controversial, but I have a feeling most of you will agree with me. Despite taking place in the fall, The Goonies is absolutely a summer movie. And I think it has that feeling for a couple of different reasons, the main one being that the movie was released in the summer. There's also the fact that it takes place on a Saturday, so the only time we see a school in the entire movie is when Andy is at cheerleading practice. But for me, personally, the reason I consider The Goonies to be a summer movie is that I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, only about an hour and a half from the Oregon locations where The Goonies was filmed. And I have many distinct memories of watching The Goonies on rainy days in the summer. It's one of those movies that if you grew up with, it means the world to you. I honestly am not positive you can see The Goonies as an adult and have the same love for it as you would if you saw it as a kid. And that's no knock against the movie, if anything, it's praise. Steven Spielberg, Dick Donner, and Chris Columbus managed to produce maybe the greatest coming-of-age adventure movie ever made. Sure, it's not as profound or as bittersweet as like Stand By Me, but it is filled with iconic moments, lines, and characters. But you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back in time just a bit and talk about how The Goonies came to be. There are a few stories floating out there about the origin of this movie. One is that while making The Color Purple, Steven Spielberg found himself pondering the question, what do kids do on a rainy day? As a concept for a movie. The other origin story is that Chris Columbus developed the idea based on his childhood growing up in a mining town and venturing into the closed down mines as a kid during the summer. And as with all stories in Hollywood, I'm sure the truth lies somewhere in the middle, where both Spielberg and Columbus had separate ideas they were thinking about, and when they met up, they just combined their ideas into one story. And it sounds like very early on, Spielberg knew he did not want to direct this one and just wanted to produce, so he called up his friend and mentor Richard Donner, who directed some small movies you might have heard of, like 1978's Superman, Lethal Weapon, and Conspiracy Theory, just to name a few. And actually, is there any love out there for the movie Conspiracy Theory? That's one I grew up loving that I never hear anyone talking about, that I would love to do a video on. So if you want a video on Conspiracy Theory, please let me know in the comments. So Dick Donner signed on to direct, Spielberg was set to produce, and Chris Columbus would write the script. As for casting, it sounds like the first of the kids cast was Ke Huy Quan, which isn't so surprising considering he'd already worked with Spielberg on Temple of Doom at this point. Sean Astin and Josh Brolin were both cast without the production team realizing that Astin's father was John Astin, who played Gomez Addams in the original Addams Family TV show, or that Brolin's father was James Brolin, who was already a movie star by this point in his career. The auditioning process for The Goonies also happens to be where Corey Feldman first met Corey Haim, when both of them were going after the role of Mouth. And originally Jeff Cohen, who plays Chunk, went after the role of Mouth as well, but the team told him he felt more like Chunk, so he went home, learned all of Chunk's lines, came back, and knocked it out of the park. As for our villains, I couldn't find much about the casting of Anne Ramsey as Mama Fratelli, but Richard Davi and Joe Pantoliano have a really fun hiring story. The two met for the first time at the audition and auditioned together, and immediately Davi called my boy out for wearing a wig, and the two did not really like one another and just bantered back and forth throughout their entire audition. And it was their animosity towards one another that ended up getting both of them the jobs, and it sounds like these two spent the entire shoot playing pranks on one another and messing with each other and slowly turning their animosity into friendship. So with the cast and crew locked into place, they had to figure out where the hell they were going to shoot this thing. So Donner and his location managers hopped in a van and took a trip up the West Coast. They stopped in every little town they went through until they ended up in Astoria and Cannon Beach, Oregon. And they pretty much instantly knew that this was the place. So on October 22nd, 1984, The Goonies went into production with a budget of $19 million, which would be about $58.5 million today adjusted for inflation. Filming took place in Astoria and Cannon Beach, Oregon, as well as the Warner Brothers lot, including the famous Soundstage 16, which is where the pirate ship was held. And the movie was finally released into the world on June 7th, 1985, where it was the second highest grossing movie at the box office that weekend, making $9.1 million against its $19 million budget. The Goonies would go on to make a domestic total of $61.3 million, making it an objective financial success and hit. Even critics quite liked The Goonies. Both Siskel and Ebert gave it 3 out of 4 stars. And with all of that out of the way, I think it's time we dive deep into The Goonies and go over everything that's made it endure in movie lovers' minds for the last 40 years. The Goonies is one of those movies that if you love every frame of it, and I definitely tend to fall in that category, because even when we just get the movie's title card, I'm already doing the Leo from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood meme. The movie also lets us know up front that this is a Steven Spielberg presentation, but the movie is directed by Dick Donner, and it sounds like over the years the cast has revealed that Spielberg really operated as more of a co-director with Donner, and Spielberg even shot some second unit footage for the movie, including the infamous Lost Gorilla crash sequence that was confirmed to be filmed, but the footage has sadly been completely lost to time. The entire opening sequence of The Goonies does such an excellent job introducing us to the tone of the story, the town of Astoria, and all of our main characters. First, we meet Robert Davi's Jake Fratelli escaping from jail and find Joey Pants as Francis and Anne Ramsey as their mom waiting for him outside. And the maniacal laugh that Francis lets out here as he shoots the gasoline is incredible, as is the rest of this chase sequence. As we follow the chase through the town of Astoria, we're introduced to all of our primary characters, and I've always felt like this is such a clever way of introducing us to the movie's world and characters. The standout introductions for me are Martha Plimpton as Steph, who's apparently sorting crabs and lobsters for her parents here. Also Corey Feldman's mouth watching Some Like It Hot and smacking the TV when the sound doesn't stop after he turns it off. The milkshake exploding all over Jeff Cohen's chunk, and of course the iconic introduction to Ke Huy Quan's Data as he tests his latest gadget. But I like that The Goonies saves its first real scene to be with Sean Astin as Mikey Walsh and Josh Brolin as Brandon Walsh, and their first scene does a lot to set the movie up. We learn the main conflict is that their house is very likely going to be foreclosed on and they're going to have to move away. We also get a great feel for their relationship. They love one another, but they're also brothers and love to mess with each other. I've also always loved how Mikey tries to use words he doesn't quite know. It's just a fun little character trait that he picked up from his mom. It's also really special when all of Mikey's friends just start showing up at the house. First Mouth, then Chunk, who's forced to do the truffle shuffle and humiliate himself. And of course we get the first of many Rube Goldberg inspired inventions with Mikey opening the front gate for Chunk. It's so silly and fun, as is Data's entrance themed by taped James Bond music, where he inadvertently breaks this replica of the Statue of David. Which leads to 2 of my favorite jokes in the movie when Mouth says,
"It wouldn't be here if it wasn't."
And when Chunk glues the penis on upside down and says,
"It's fine to me."
Actually, this sequence also has Mouth showing Lupe Ontiveros' Rosalita around the house and lying to her about what Mrs. Walsh is saying and just being an overall little turd. But once Mrs. Walsh and Rosalita are gone, the boys head up to the attic to look at all the overflow items from the local museum that Mr. Walsh works at. And my favorite moments here have always been Mouth sticking his tongue through the painting and Mikey counting down from 5 seconds waiting for Chunk to drop the frame he just handed him. The attic is also just a well done piece of exposition. We find the map, learn what it leads to, learn the lore of the map, and we learned about the last guy who tried to find the treasure and was never found, Chester Copperpot. This sequence also does a good job of doubling down on the stakes of the house, with the town rich guy and jerk, Mr. Perkins, stopping by, and I've always loved Brand saying,
"No sir, actually she's out at the market buying Pampers for all us kids."
And actually, really quick, I just have to say that as a fellow Brandon, I hate the nickname Brand that Brolin has in this movie. No one has ever called me Brand. I'm a Brando through and through. But at the same time, the only people I want calling me Brando are people I'm close with, my wife, and friends of my wife.
My wife!
The scene with Mikey, Chunk, Mouth, and Data all behind the map is one of the most iconic shots in the movie. It also features some of the most obvious ADR I've heard in any movie ever. Well, any movie not called Madam Web anyway. But hey, it's just a movie, it's not that deep. I still to this day laugh out loud when I get to the scene of the boys incapacitating Brand before they make their escape on their bikes. And I cringe every time Mouth lets the air out of Brand's tires. But that does give us 2 of the best visual jokes in the movie. Brand stealing this little girl's bike with training wheels on it, and Troy just casually trying to murder Brand because he's feeling insecure. For me personally, this sequence of the kids biking through Astoria makes me feel a little homesick. Cinematographer Nick McLean absolutely nailed the look of the Pacific Northwest on an overcast day. I can practically feel the cool air burning in my nostrils when I watch this scene, and this is something special, as is the way he captured all of the set pieces in the tunnels. Everything could feel really dark and dreary, but instead it feels exciting scene. And even when we get to the end of the movie, the way the water in the cavern is overly blue and shiny is just beautiful and perfect. So shout out to Nick McLean, he absolutely killed it on this movie. Once the boys reach the restaurant, they're convinced that One-Eyed Willie's rich stuff must be nearby. And we get what I personally think is the most unbelievable part of the entire movie, that 4 boys living in Astoria, Oregon would not recognize the sound of a gunshot. But they go into the restaurant anyway, and we get the Fratellis serving them up gross water, the introduction of John Matsuka as Sloth, and Mama Fratelli threatening to cut out Mouth's tongue before saying,
"Kids suck."
And this is where our entire group finally comes together, with Brand, Steph, and Carrie Green's Andy showing up and following the boys along on their adventure. And one of this movie's strongest features is the dynamics between all of the different characters, and the fact that there's a clear distinction between the teenage characters and the kid characters. Once back inside the restaurant, we get the discovery of the corpse in the freezer, and poor Chunk getting locked in with him, as the rest of our heroes make their way underground to try and escape the Fratellis, who've just come back to the restaurant. Here is where the team splits up. Everyone leaves Chunk behind, telling him to go get help, which to his credit, he does try and do. It's just that the first car he flags down happens to be the Fratelli brothers, who take him right back to the restaurant and threaten to torture him. And I have to say that I think Jeff Cohen's performance away from the main group is one of the strongest in the movie. First of all, him crying and telling the Fratellis all of the messed up things he's ever done is hilarious, especially because Robert Davi is legitimately laughing as he's listening to Chunk talk about the movie theater incident, which apparently Spielberg actually pulled this prank off as a kid. And I just have to ask, Steven, why didn't you include this in the Fablemans? But my favorite moment of Chunk at the restaurant with the Fratellis is him dropping to the floor to eat ice cream and them ripping the carton and spoon out of his hand, and him starting to cry. You can actually hear Dick Donner laughing off camera if you turn the volume all the way up. While the Fratellis have Chunk, our main group of heroes is making their way beneath the town of Astoria. Their first major set piece, of course, being the pipes beneath the country club, which I still think is hilarious, especially when Troy yells, "Daddy!" When they move on, they find the remains of Chester Copperpot and the first of many of One-Eyed Willie's booby traps.
Booby traps.
That's what I said. Which feels very Indiana Jones-esque, which isn't that surprising, I suppose. I mean, we've even got Short Round here. Unfortunately, after this, Brand moves a rock and lets out a swarm of bats, and this is what tips the Fratellis off to go underground and start following them. Which, of course, leads to the meeting of Chunk and Sloth. And I mean, what is there to say about their meeting? It's perfect and sweet, and they just hit it off right away. And before they head underground to save their friends, Chunk calls the sheriff, and we get this fun little nod to Gremlins, which had come out earlier that year. The wishing well scene is one where Corey Feldman and Sean Astin really get their chance to shine, and both have long emotional monologues that really help deepen both of their characters. It's also where Astin says,
"Goonies never say die!"
Once the group decides not to head up through the wishing well and instead head deeper into their journey, they first need to take a bathroom break, and Andy accidentally making out with Mikey is legit so funny, but it's even funnier that she doesn't even remotely realize that she wasn't making out with Brand. When the Fratellis do finally catch up to our heroes, we get a fun chase through the tunnels. The standout here is obviously Data using slick shoes and making Francis fall down and hit his balls. And the kids really do succeed at slowing these guys down, but they never stop them. And the last two set pieces of the Goonies are hands down the best in the entire movie. We get this beautiful bone organ that was handcrafted from bamboo and skeletons bought from the local medical supply store. And then we get the water slide leading straight to the pirate ship. Also, can someone please explain to me how all of these kids emerged from different water slides? And the pirate ship was fully practical and modeled after an Errol Flynn movie called The Seahawk from 1940. Like I said, the water slide is just the coolest thing ever, and Richard Donner kept all of the kids from seeing the pirate ship until the day they filmed it because he wanted their authentic reactions on camera, which he did get. Unfortunately, their authentic reactions included some cursing that made the footage completely unusable for the final movie. Once we're finally on the ship, we get this really nice little moment between Mikey and One-Eyed Willie, who was also created using skeletons from the local medical supply store. And I really like that Mikey insists they leave some treasure for Willie, but anything else is fair game. The Fratellis arriving to the ship is a lot of fun as well, specifically Mouth having a, well, mouthful of jewelry and gems and spitting them out, and of course the arrival of Sloth and Chunk is just the kind of moment that maybe doesn't make the most sense logically, but you're so happy to see them, it doesn't matter. And Sloth and Chunk fully save the day, with Sloth staying behind to make sure his family doesn't die, even though he knows he should, because I mean, come on, they're just the worst. Once the kids make it out of the cave and onto the beach, everyone everyone is reunited with their families. Mr. Perkins shows up to make Mr. Walsh sign the foreclosure documents, but luckily Rosalita finds all of these gems in Mikey's marble bag just in time. And I personally just love this insert shot of the gems being poured into the hand. It just really works for me and captures my imagination. The thing I like most about this ending is just sort of meeting all of the parents and seeing how alike everyone is and how happy everyone is to be together. There's also this moment where Data mentions the scene with the octopus that was ultimately cut from the final movie, and I have to say, I did finally watch this deleted scene when I was writing this video, and if I'm being honest, I'm glad it was cut. But of course it ends the way any perfect summer movie should end, with a giant 300-year-old pirate ship sailing off into the sunset as Dave Grusin's excellent score plays us out. So a full 40 years later, what is the legacy of the Goonies? I mean, what is there to say? It's one of the most beloved movies of all time, especially for people that saw it as a kid. Every year on June 7th, the city of Astoria hosts a Goonies Day, and many cast members and crew members come up and do appearances and panels, and it brings in crowds of upwards of 15,000 people to the city of Astoria every single year. The Goonies is a movie that has fully seeped into the pop culture lexicon. It's a movie that even if you haven't seen, you know plenty of moments or lines from it. And in 2017, the movie was also selected to be added to the United States Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. And as someone that grew up loving pop punk and going to pop punk shows, The Goonies has loomed bizarrely large over that world. New Found Glory covered Goonies Are Good Enough, Set Your Goals had a song called Goonies Never Say Die, the Ataris put out an album called So Long Astoria that makes multiple references to the Goonies. There's also a band called Slick Shoes and one from France called Chunk, No, Captain Chunk, and there's probably 100 other references to the Goonies across pop punk and every other genre of music out there, because again, it's one of the most beloved movies of all time. As for a sequel, sadly, Richard Donner passed away in 2021, but in February of 2025, it was announced that a sequel was actively in the works, with Potsy Ponzarelli set to write and Spielberg set to produce, but there hasn't been any new information since February of this year. Personally, I hope this sequel never gets made, but given the state of movies in 2025, I think it's safe to say it'll probably happen in the next couple years. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you for watching, and a big thank you to all of my patrons who support at the producer and executive producer level. You help make these videos possible. If you'd like to join the Patreon, there's a link to it in the description below. As a reminder, Born to Rant is a completely independent channel, and I use absolutely no AI in the making of my videos. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We release new videos covering all of your childhood favorites every Thursday morning at 7 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.